you buy a game from Balor, you should expect it being made by developers who genuinely deeply care about their product and published by people that genuinely care deeply about your experiences, right? I often tell the team internally,
Mhm.
we are the advocate, we are the last line of defense for the player.
Get ready. Hey everyone, my guest today spent 15 years at Blizzard Entertainment, helping build some of the most iconic marketing moments in gaming history, including the world's first 24-hour live gaming stream and the campaign that made Overwatch League the first city-based esports league on Earth. He then moved to Humble Bundle, where he built their publishing arm into one of indie gaming's most important platforms, supporting over 50 studios and founding the Black Game Developer Fund, which has invested millions into Black developers globally. When Humble Games shut down its entire staff in July of 2024, he took a week and then he started over. 18 months later, his new company is Balor Games, one of the most talked about AAA publishers in the industry. His name is Mark Nash, and this is exactly the kind of story Replay exists for. Mark, welcome to the show. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. I so appreciate your time and coming on. It's going to be a fun conversation for sure. We have a lot to talk about for sure. But before we really dive in and get into kind of your Blizzard days and everything that followed, I wanted to start somewhere that, I find genuinely interesting, especially as I was doing my research. You have a computer science degree from the University of Kent in England. Is that correct?
Yeah, so as probably the accent gives me away, I grew up in the UK.
Yeah. And at some point, you ended up at Blizzard in Irvine, California, which I believe was back in 2005, which is much earlier than I think maybe most people realize. Could you maybe take a moment and walk me through that journey? How does a British CS grad end up at Blizzard in Southern California?
It's a very it's the kindest way everyone's ever called me old, but yeah. So the
right there with you.
So I guess I get asked a lot of how do people get kind of into the industry? How do I break in, stuff like that? My journey was a very organic one. So as you mentioned, kind of growing up in the UK. Came from working class background. Video games was a great escape for me as a child, and started gaming as early as 3 years old. I had an older brother and pestered him, and just to show my age, I grew up playing things like a ZX Spectrum, for those that might know it, like a retro gaming thing in the 80s. Exactly, with the cassette tapes, if people know what those are. And then I graduated to an Atari ST, right, and the Amiga and stuff like that. So, and then got into PC gaming, and one of the with that kind of love of those things, obviously Blizzard Entertainment, games like Diablo and StarCraft and Warcraft, etc., was something that I was very, very passionate about. Because I was an absolute nerd, the computer science degree made a lot of sense, right? And studied my undergraduate for that. But I always had an ambition to work abroad, to kind of spread my wings and kind of try different things. And an opportunity came up at Blizzard Entertainment, which at the time had just they'd shipped Warcraft 3. They were just working through kind of the release of World of Warcraft, and because the game was starting to blow up, they were looking to kind of scale the team globally pretty quickly. And again, this was such a long time ago. This predated things like the smartphone, YouTube, right? These things didn't exist back then, and I was a player of World of Warcraft, through kind of the beta and then the initial launch that they did, and again being that huge fan of Warcraft, and I made a video that was effectively, it was a community little video. I'd made it with the people that I was playing World of Warcraft with. That was the Spamalot scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And again, this predates YouTube. So where do you post these things, right? Where do you share videos? So the video went viral. It went early pre-YouTube viral, and everyone at Blizzard saw it, both in the US team and the European team. And separately, when I was like, hey, I just want to get a job at Blizzard, why not just send off a resume? At the time, they had an office in Paris, just outside of Paris in France, and it was like, cool, that meets my kind of ambitions and career goals. So they loved the video. They brought me in for an interview just to talk about the video. My interview
No
was
way.
just talking about this video, talking about World of Warcraft. Obviously, the culture was a little bit more loose in terms of getting into game, but this is an insane story, right? Like I got hired because I made a silly video, but they gave they obviously liked what I had to say to the more serious job interview questions. I got into the company. And there was a lot of work to be done, right? The company was scaling from several hundred people to several thousand
Yeah.
people. They had to figure out things like how do we provide, support in multiple languages now that we're a global company. Localization is a thing that even today in 2026, that companies still kind of wrangle a lot with that, right? And it was just a lot to get done, and no one had done these things before, right? Like there were a few popular MMOs, but nothing that was kind of reaching the popularity and scale of what World of Warcraft was doing at the time. So I got a lot of great opportunities on the back of that. Was able to kind of grow my career through publishing. Got to work on lots and lots of cool new things, like you mentioned. Years later, Blizzard had now transitioned into a multi-game studio, multiple teams, concurrent marketing, right? Multiple IPs
Mm-hmm.
interacting with each other. Um, you know, in 2008, there was the acquisition the merger between Activision and Vivendi Games, which
Yep.
became Activision Blizzard, and ultimately the company continued to scale from there. But
So first and foremost, the internet lives forever, as they say. Can that video still be found if people search for it?
probably, I don't know if I never uploaded it to YouTube because it was
Yeah.
again several years before YouTube. Maybe we can find the link for it and
Yeah, absolutely.
include
We'll
it
take a
somewhere
look
offline.
for sure.
Yeah,
I've not seen it. I would love to. I wish
yeah.
I had done more research on that.
I will say it was predates all the motion capture tools and
Right.
like obviously modern day
Machinima,
AI
all of
tools.
those things.
Oh yeah, it
Yeah.
is objectively bad. Like it's objectively bad, but but it was all filmed in the game. We had to have for anyone who's a World of Warcraft player watching this, um, we had to get the group of us that were playing. We had to run because there's parts of the scene that are played. We were playing on the Horde side,
Right.
and there were parts of the scene that were filmed because of the Camelot theme were filmed in the Alliance side's Stormwind, right? If you know it at all. So
Yep.
we had to take low level characters and we had to run these characters into the enemy town to film all this stuff. And we just kept getting killed by the other because they didn't know what was going on. There was just a ton
Sure.
of characters that were running
Yeah.
around. They had no idea what was happening. There was like 30 of us,
Amazing.
and ultimately it took us many hours just to get on location so we could actually film the 30 seconds of footage that we actually needed to film for the video. So
Brilliant. Brilliant. You are a dedicated man, clearly. So you were at Blizzard for quite a stretch, it's all, and it's especially during that time around 2005 to 2020. Is that correct?
yeah, so
Yeah.
I was with Blizzard, just after World of Warcraft had launched, and
Yeah.
and through kind of multiple games that happened over that period of time, and then that's when I left for Humble Bundle, and
Yeah. Well,
just before COVID lockdowns happened. I thought it was a good idea to change careers at that point.
good timing for sure. Timing's everything. But that's a really, from my perspective, an extraordinary window to be inside that company. You were there before like all of the big expansions for WoW, Diablo 3, Hearthstone launching, Overwatch, kind of like taking off. Of course, you mentioned the merger with Activision. What was that like, kind of watching all that from the inside over that long of, an arc?
I mean, it was a tremendous opportunity, right? I was
Yeah.
extremely lucky and privileged to be with such, I mean, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think, technically, I think Blizzard in that run had like 23 number one selling games in a
Yeah.
row, right?
It's
Like
amazing.
every game it
Sure.
released, it set the bar higher each time. And, that's a phenomenal run for any organization, right? And one of the, there's a lot. I think when people talk about Blizzard, there's a lot of folks who focus on maybe some of the things that were negative or weren't as positive, right? It was definitely a hard environment to work
Sure.
in.
Yeah.
And it was definitely an environment that was highly pressured, right? I think
Can
those of
imagine.
us that were, yeah, those of us that were working in that environment, because also my
Yeah.
role had gone from, I was someone who joined the team as an individual contributor, right? And kind of my career grew through that period of
Yeah.
time as well. Like I didn't come in as one of the founders or one of the leaders on the team, right? I was often in doing a lot of the execution, right? Or later in my career, organizing a lot of that execution.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think the team bonded very, very tightly, right? There was a lot of shared understanding of the level of excellence and the level of quality that you need to have that kind of fan
Mm.
base, right? And the
Hmm.
fan base demanded that. So when we think about my new venture with Balor Games is like a lot of
Yeah.
those taking the right lessons and applying them, right? Like I don't think you could establish a studio today like Blizzard Entertainment and for it to really reflect or be as successful as what it was in the early 2000s, right? I think a lot
Yeah.
of these things are very much a reflection of the time, as well as the effort. But I think everyone who was working there was highly committed to ensuring that people had great games to play. There was great marketing, right? There was great publishing activity. And ultimately, from the outside, when you look at the history books of that, just focused on the products, right? Didn't always get it right 100% of the time with the marketing, with the games, right? But it was
Yeah.
always coming from a sincere, authentic place of wanting to do very well and having high standards of quality in what was being done.
Yeah. Yeah. For the fans, clearly, that was one of their kind of front and center things that, from an outsider or gamer, I could see, even with some of the foibles. By the time you left in 2020, clearly Blizzard had turned into a different beast over that time. That's over that span of time. Were there any, like, kind of like being, removed from that situation, things like you're like, wow, things that had changed within the company over that time?
Yeah, I mean, the company definitely evolved,
Yeah.
right? Leadership had evolved, right? While the the core values of the company around the products was very strong and well identified. I think in terms of how does the company achieve its goals, right? That had always been
Yeah.
something that was very fluid. And for me, to talk about kind of my personal experiences there, I was involved in a lot of that kind of transition, right? One
Mm-hmm.
of the things I worked on from a publishing perspective was the onboarding of the Activision games onto BattleNet. That was a big focus. This was
Yeah.
obviously around a time where everybody was creating their own launchers. BattleNet had been Blizzard's launcher for many many years, right?
Yep.
Predating the other publishers doing that. So it made a lot of sense, right? If you're sharing your games, right? If you share them on your own platform, you don't have to necessarily give those platform fees away. And BattleNet customers operate and work a little bit differently from say Steam customers, right, on the PC market, and same way that Fortnite customers would operate very differently on the Epic platform versus a non Fortnite player.
Yeah.
So that was obviously it made sense strategically, right, in that sense of that you'd want all your games in the Activision Blizzard universe to be on your home platform, and but that was also a big existential step for Blizzard, right? There was a lot of times when I'm talking to leaders and senior leaders on the company, and I'm the one helping them kind of come to terms with that. Like, hey, we're not just a developer that publishes our own stuff. We're now a publisher, right? And we're doing things a little bit differently, right? We got to work very closely with Bungie during that period,
Yeah. Yeah.
as they were kind of releasing, Destiny 2
Destiny.
and the expansions. So um, when it came to 2020, I think one of the things I've always valued my own career on was how do I have an impact in what I'm doing? And what I was starting to see around that time, kind of 2019, 2020, was that impact was kind of slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
for me personally, I was like, well, how do I think about my next chapter in my career? About how do I get back to having that impact? And obviously, a company like Humble Bundle, that raised, I think at this point in time, it's raised over $250 million for charity, which is not something many people seem to know, right, and heard
Right.
about.
Yeah.
Um, that's a huge, that's the very definition of impact, right, and being able to
Yep.
help people directly through gaming community, and that was something I always enjoyed at Blizzard as well. So being able to kind of move my experience, move my understanding of kind of, particularly the PC gaming market to Humble and help them build out Humble Games was definitely the right next step.
That's really cool. And then, I wanted to talk about something, another part of Blizzard that like you had a pretty big impact over, um, or that was to me, like, I think a landmark moment that I was doing in my research that, the world's first 24-hour live gaming stream for Heart of the
Mhm.
Swarm in 2013. I'm really interested in that. I'm interested in that. I would love for you to walk me through what that actually was and how that came together.
Yeah, that was a great. Obviously with everything at Blizzard, it's always a large team
Yeah.
that execute these things. So one of the activations for Heart of the Swarm, which was the expansion for StarCraft 2, and for the folks who have played StarCraft or familiar with StarCraft, StarCraft's always had a fantastic community of content creators and influencers built around the game and its esports and everything else. So, big part of kind of the opportunity there was to include that global community and that sense of scale and eventizing the launch of the game. So, it was a production that touched multiple teams globally, kind of trying to translate that. These things, even Blizzard, right, at its at its height of popularity, doesn't have infinite budgets for these things, right? So it's trying to execute all of this. Um, we worked with teams or individuals like Day Nine, right, and
Hmm.
it was fully integrated. So we were doing handoffs between different Blizzard teams. Obviously, we had a team in Korea, Blizzard Korea, that where StarCraft esports is extremely popular.
Yep.
They're a big part of it. We have the team in Europe as well. So it was really, and again, probably someone could fact check me and someone else had done it before, but it was definitely, streaming was still becoming a thing, right? Back then, you didn't have the same kind of dominance of digital platforms like Twitch in terms of,
Yep.
kind of gaming content. I think it might have even been Justin TV back then, actually. If
Yep. I
don't
believe
fact
so.
check me on that, but it's about the right time. So the idea that we were producing our own live stream, we were deploying it on our own channels, we were deploying it on other people's channels as well, right? Simultaneously broadcasting it, handing off to multiple locations. So it took many months of planning, and kind of my role in that was helping, project manager produce a lot of that. But again, it's a much larger team, so I would be amiss to take too much credit for it. But I think the idea that where it was coming from strategically was that when you're lucky and you're in Blizzard's position, you've built a community around an IP. You want to
Yeah.
include that community as much as possible in future endeavors of the game, right? And again, that's a lesson I've also taken into the indie space of like you. That's your, you can't find a more effective marketing activation than when you can get your own players to advocate for your own game, right? And then you have to give them
Yeah.
content and events that they can celebrate and they can feel like they're a valued part of the community. And yeah, doing a 24 live stream, allowing people to basically watch it like it was the Super Bowl, right, for 24 hours, and
Yeah.
and also, but then another way you could have done that type of activation would have been to, okay, we're just going to base it in the US in the headquarters, and maybe we'll do a lot of content. Maybe we'll even do some content overnight, right, and set up the
Right.
production that way. But I think that leaves many people behind because you're ultimately not telling the story about StarCraft means something different to a person living and playing in Korea than it does, say, someone in Utah, right, or the United Kingdom or Spain or South America, right? So finding the opportunities to tie in more of that community, and there's limits, right? You can't include everybody in that kind of thing. There's logistical limits to it, but I think that's still when you have those kind of resources behind you, it's a great way to celebrate any IP.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of along those lines, then there was the Destiny 2 free giveaway in 2018, which set a franchise record for peak daily active users. I'm curious, like, what was the thinking behind offering a AAA game for free? And were there any lessons learned from that?
Well, I think we were. I was sitting in quite a distinct position, right? I was a Blizzard
Yeah,
employee, working to support a non-Blizzard IP
right.
with the Blizzard community, right? And that was kind of my job, was being an advocate for the Blizzard community, and the Blizzard fandom and the Blizzard brand, right? So, if memory serves correctly, I think that giveaway was also um, connected to BlizzCon, which was
Hmm.
the annual fan event that's
Yeah.
done for the Blizzard community. It's been on a couple of years hiatus, I think, but I believe they're doing one soon, if memory serves correctly as well.
Yep.
Um, but back then, anyway, there was a lot of community sentiment and feedback and pushback on um, Activision being part of the BattleNet community, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was sentiment around like, what does this mean? Does this mean a change of business model? Does this
Yeah.
mean a change of content? Right? There was a general kind of fear of the unknown, and the
Yep.
Blizzard community, to its credit, has always been very vocal, very opinionated about what it likes and doesn't like. So, um, but I think in the role I was in, I was a huge fan of Destiny, the game. Right, I would play it. I would do raids. I was very engaged with the game and the quality of it. And Bungie had made Destiny 2 is a great game. Um, so what I was trying to find was like, how do we endear these brands? Like,
Mm.
if you're going to someone's house party, right?
Yeah.
Bring a gift. And so we're thinking about where Destiny 2 was in its life cycle as well, and we thought this was a great opportunity for for Destiny to show up as a positive brand, to have a positive interaction, to reach people that may not have necessarily identified. They certainly wouldn't identify themselves as, well, I'm an Activision fan. Like,
Yeah.
it's not really the profile. Even if they did play Call of Duty or Destiny or anything else, right? They wouldn't see themselves inherently in that community.
Yeah.
So we were like, great. Well, then let's find ways that we can expose the game and the quality of the game to those individuals, and the game will talk for itself, right? If we can get people to try it and they like that type of game, there's really no and there's really no downside to this, right? It's a win for the Activision brand. It's a win for the Destiny brand. It's a great gift for the attendees of BlizzCon, right? Like,
Yeah.
and the ticket holders of BlizzCon. So that was kind of the genesis of it. As we were collaborating across the two teams, and it was ultimately me just pitching different things and be like, hey, what about this? This could really lead to some outcomes that open up Destiny to more of the Blizzard community.
Did you guys find after the fact that that was a successful campaign?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, but again, for folks who might not be familiar with Destiny's business model, a lot of the game monetization happens through expansion packs
Right.
and kind of other,
Yeah.
uh, you know, uh, microtransactions that people
Sure.
can do. So it wasn't always just about
The core.
selling the base game.
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously Destiny was always set up as a live service game, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
having a larger player base is healthy. And a
Totally.
lot of those people, a lot of those people who go to BlizzCon, they play Blizzard's live service games as well, right? So it wasn't, in terms of thinking about targeting, if we put our marketing hats on for a quick second, thinking about the audience targeting, it was just ultimately a way to hyper focus and hyper target an audience that
Yeah.
we thought would love a free game, because they are
Yeah.
gamers, right? And
Right.
who hates a free game?
Nobody I know.
Exactly.
Very cool. Thank you for taking a minute to talk a little bit about that. I was just curious. But let's just move on from there and talk about a little bit about the Humble Bundle stuff, because that also is a big part of your career. Specifically, I know I think around June of 2020, which I believe was like pretty close to when you first joined, you founded something called the Black Game Developer Fund, and that's not a small thing to take on in your first month or so at a new job. So can you talk more about that? Like, what was going on in your head at that moment? Why did you decide this was something that you and Humble needed to do? Clearly
Yeah,
it's an important thing.
and again, there was a
Yeah,
team of us at Humble Bundle,
clearly. Yeah.
and even Humble Bundle's parent company Ziff Davis as well. Like they were part of those discussions. So ultimately, we were all touched, and affected by what had happened with George Floyd and that
Yeah.
situation, and it's devastating situation that is sadly to say, even now, right? Things are not in a better place, right? And but even then, back in 2020, it was clear that the systemic issues around racial identity and systemic issues around racial equality
Yeah.
were not being addressed, right? And we saw a lot of outpouring of emotion in the industry when that happened. But we were discussing it ourselves, and again at Humble, and the leadership team there, we always talk about things in terms of, like, outcomes over activities, right? How can we have an impact in
Mm.
what we're doing? And we discussed it, and ultimately, what we landed on was that there was a lack of racial equity, right? We were
Yeah.
identifying a lack of racial equity, representation. I think a lot of people identified, diversity and representation. These are not only the right thing to do; they're good business as well, right? And people want content coming from diverse voices, right? They want content that represents themselves, right? And when video games often are filled with a cast of characters, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That diversity only leads to good outcomes, right?
Yeah.
So as long as it's done well, right? As long as it's authentic and
Sure.
done well. So we were looking at this, and we were trying to step through it, right? We were like, hey, why is there a lack of, black owned and operated studios in the industry, right? And we didn't have a lot of time to go, spend a lot of time and do very deep research on this,
Right.
right? This
Dig
was
for
more
the
the
data.
teams. Exactly, there's more teams that are
Yeah.
kind of our own read of it. We talked to partners in the community, and I'll kind of touch on Justin Cite's role in a second, because they were our lead advisors. They were a huge part of making it successful. But ultimately, we were talking to folks in the industry. We were talking to other people. We were talking to folks who had been successful, folks who had struggled to get funding, and ultimately, what it came down to was there was a systemic lack of issue that most indie game developers, especially, right, or independent studios and things like this,
Mm.
they're born in slightly different ways, right? But at the time, one of the common paths was, hey, there was someone who had achieved independent wealth, being part of another studio, or had an exit, right? And they were able to
Yeah.
use that wealth to then fund something new, or use that reputation as being a leader of a thing to raise money from private investors to to fund their next studio, right? So there are multitude of ways to tackle this, right? And ultimately, a true solution comes through a multitude of solutions, right? And
Hmm.
handling this at multiple levels as well. Humble Bundle wasn't going to solve this problem on its own, but what we did think was, well, there's stuff that we can do that would have an impact, and it would at least tackle a aspect of what we thought was a wider systemic issue, and that was, how do we get more black owned and operated studios to exist? How do we give more opportunities for that to happen in our industry that could then move on to greater success for people? So that was the genesis of the Black Game Developer Fund. So we'd made a commitment to fund projects and studios that were black owned and operated.
And not
We
just in the
we
US, right? But also globally.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
a global operation. We had then brought on, as astute viewers will see, right? I'm not black, and ultimately, it didn't feel appropriate
Yeah.
to move forward with a program like this without representation from that community, right?
Yeah.
So, we were very fortunate. We brought Justin and Cite on to be our advisors, and ultimately to ensure that the decision making around the games that we were picking was done as a group effort, right? And then our role, once a project had been identified, was then to provide some initial seed funding so that they could then take that game
Yeah.
to a publisher, to a private investor, and use that to leverage investment. They didn't have to pay the money back, and ultimately that was grants of $50,000, which if you're in pre-production, that's a significant budget
That's a
for an indie
chunk.
game.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of
Yeah.
that, we would provide mentoring. We would provide through Justin Site, myself, others on the team. We'd provide feedback on the publishing end. We would give them feedback on like, hey, if you're going to take this to a publisher, this is what at least an indie publisher like Humble Games would be looking for, right? We provide templates, other documentation, and we would also, as a publisher, we would also look at the games as well, and be like, okay, how do we help? Are there games here that we can work with, that we can elevate, that makes sense within the Humble Games catalog? So a game like Protojoy Delta was one of those games that kind of graduated, and then we ended up supporting Adam, the developer, through the launch of the game as well. So, yeah, so I think we were trying to put our money where our mouth was, right? And
Yeah.
it wasn't a charity. We were running it as part of our R&D budget, effectively. So there was no benefit that we were getting for this from a tax reason or any other reason. This was purely us trying to, with the resources and the platform we had, trying to find a way to address the program.
Yeah. And I know you just mentioned one example, but are there any like specific stories or people or teams or games that captures what the program actually meant or means?
Cool. I mean, how much time do we have? I could talk for hours. I mean, I
Pick
think
one.
Okay, okay. Gun to head, pick one. I mean, El Paso Elsewhere is another great example, right?
Absolutely.
I don't think it's unfair to say a love letter to the Max Payne games, right?
Yeah.
Personal favorite one, and I think that was it. We had a diversity of content, right? We had corgi-based beat 'em ups like games like Breeze in the Clouds. We had other games like I mentioned Protojoy Delta, right, which is a love letter to 3D Mega Man, El Paso Elsewhere, Max Payne. We also saw a ton. There wasn't just the games that we actually ended up funding. We only had a limited number of titles we could sign. It was just a healthy amount. We were committing $1 million a year, and all the program funding was coming out of that, and we were doing $50,000 grants, right? But we also had tons and tons of games that we weren't able to fund or couldn't fund, but we still gave feedback. We still tried to provide as much as we could where we could, right? And it was a small team. It was about 5 of us in total, with Justin Site included, that were working all of this. So yeah, it was. But again, we just thought it was the right thing to do, so we were fully committed to it.
At Humble, you kind of built their games publishing arm from starting. I believe you started as marketing director, and then you moved up the food chain to VP of global publishing, and you're supporting at least 50 studios, if not more, across second, third party development. I'm assuming most of our audience will know Humble and know it well, but if for the few that maybe don't know what Humble Games is or was, could you maybe talk about it for a moment? And what were you guys building? What was the platform?
Humble Bundle, which is still around, humblebundle.com, is a retail subscription platform for video games in general, and Humble Bundle was founded on the basis of raising money for charity by fundraising through selling video games. So in theory, when you buy something on Humble Bundle, a portion of that money goes to a charity, right? And that was Jeff and John who founded Humble Bundle. So Humble Bundle started off actually as like one-off collections or bundles, if you will, of games that developers would come together, they would donate their games to the bundle, and then that money would be raised and handed off to charity. That's probably most of the story that most people that are familiar with the industry might have heard of that. So how did it grow from there? Well, one of the things it grew into was a monthly subscription service that predates Game Pass and other services of similar type. And what it was doing was you subscribed each month, you would then get an array of games, right? Some were AAA, some were indie. They were all curated though, right? It wasn't just pulling random 5 games off of Steam and throwing it in the bundle. And you would get to own those. So again, unlike other subscription services, you once you'd had these games, even if you stopped subscribing, you would you would have them in your Steam library or other platform libraries that are playing the game. So Humble Bundle was doing that. It had grown into this subscription service, and then um, understandably, Humble's like, hey, well, we're licensing these games to put into these bundles now, because Humble Bundle was taking a bit of money themselves. Money was going to the charity, and money was then being given to the developers and publishers for their including their content in the
Yeah.
subscription service. It evolved a little bit from an all-from charity, even though Humble Bundle still did those in when there were large events that would happen in the world. Humble would still come together with the industry to do all for charity bundles. So with the subscription service, understandably, it made sense that, hey, if we're paying licensing fees, why don't we why don't we organically source our own, right? Like why don't we work with the developers directly to help publish their games, and as part of that publishing deal, we can then also platform the game as part of its life cycle through the
Yeah.
subscription service, right? So it's great ecosystem flywheel, whatever you want to call it, and something that is excited me about the company, right? When I was initially talking to them, and so so as I mentioned, I joined as the director of marketing, and they had just started to nascently build out this kind of publishing idea, right? They'd had a few games that they had published, the kind of linking it directly into the cycle, and then as part of those discussions with the team, we kind of identified, well, we could get bigger with this, right? Indie
Yeah.
games are still growing, I think, and this is what we're talking about in 2020, right? So we
Yeah.
didn't fully know the impact of COVID. We didn't even know what COVID was back then, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we were like, hey, this PC indie video game thing is going to grow. It's going to, PC is going to get more market share. Indie games are going to get more popular. They're going to get more accessible, but they're also going to get higher quality, right? More people will make games, and therefore we're going to need to be in a place where those indie games have stand out from a quality
Sure.
standpoint and from an innovation standpoint. So everybody liked that idea, right? Everyone liked that kind of approach. So we started to scale it. So very first thing we did was we launched the Humble Games brand,
Yeah.
to make it clearer for people. Humble Bundle was more directly involved in publishing and funding video games, and then we also increased our budgets, right? Like we were going from smaller kind of single eye, double eye games now to that were being included in the subscription as more like indie gems and things people find too. Now these are the kind of games that you would absolutely want to own and play day one, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we ended up with games like Coral Island in our portfolio and Signalis in our portfolio, right? We started to really expand our support, and then for the developers themselves, right, with this higher scope of game, it was also important to make sure they had a high quality experience of how these games were supported as well. So ensuring the team was built and scaled to a level where they felt like they were being fully supported by their publisher, right? The funding and services that they were being provided also then ensured they had effective marketing, effective release management support, right? Things that developers often seek out when they work with a publisher.
At some point, from what I understand, you were managing 50 plus studios, right, simultaneously, and that seems like a huge operational challenge. What was that like from like a day-to-day perspective? How did you
Yeah, it was
hold all that together?
it was tough, right? We had a big team. I think our team peaked around about 50 people. It was about 35 people at the
Wow.
end, but
Yeah.
so we and the games are in different types of production, right? So we didn't have 50 games all in development at the same time, because that would require a massive team. But so we're ultimately working through different phases and different life cycles for the games, right? And if games required ongoing support, right, we made sure that we were staffed and separated for that. I mean, we had a great production team, right, that worked very hard to kind of wrangle everything that was going on. We obviously worked with each of our development partners to make sure that they had the right structure and the right support to help them. And then we ultimately were able to leverage that community and that catalog, right, to lead to great outcomes, right? We announced we had made a very large think it ended up being 2021 Game Pass deal, right?
Yeah.
With the
Yeah.
catalog. Probably at the time, I think it was one of the biggest per volume of game, one of the largest catalog deals that,
Significant.
yeah, particularly in the indie
Yeah.
space, right?
Yeah.
Unless you count things like EA Play and stuff like that, but like,
Sure.
non subscription service type perk and Game Pass, right? These were just pure games. So yeah, we were able to get that kind of stuff done, and that was in part because we had that catalog, right? So all those developers benefited from that, that engagement, because we were able to kind of help Xbox out, right, and be like, hey, we can aggregate a lot, 21 games worth of deals here. So that was a massive positive, right, for having such a broad community. I mean, I think in a world we're in now, thinking about Balor Games, I think one of the lessons we learned at Humble was, and reflecting on like how we're going forward with Balor Games, is that there was sometimes a risk where it was kind of a one size fits all, and you'd run into friction on that. So if you're a studio and you've got a particular type of game, and that genre of game or that particular type of game matches with the team supporting you, excellent, right? Very low friction,
Yeah.
lots of internalized knowledge, right? Awesome. But maybe if you're a game that you're working with a brand manager or a producer, then it's not their type of game that they're familiar with, or that they've worked on before, or that they like personally, then sometimes that could slow things down, right? Or the developer could feel like they're not necessarily getting the same level of support as one of their peer groups, right? So I think that was and that's an issue of scale, because as an indie publisher, you're never going to scale to a 1-for-1 type of scale, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You'd even argue in AAA you might not do that. So that's that was kind of one of the lessons we took away from Humble Games and the time there, was that yes, we did provide great support, but sometimes that support was sometimes a little bit kind of, are you a round peg in a square hole, right? And that didn't always work out for everybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know that there was a moment in time where the entire staff of Humble Games was laid off. I think sometime in July, and I just wanted to ask you personally, like, what was that like for you? What was that day like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was. On a personal level, it was devastating, right?
I can imagine.
It was something, and there were multiple reasons for that, right? Like, being laid off is an emotionally draining, impactful thing, right?
Yeah.
And for us, even on the leadership thing, for us, it all happened very, very suddenly, and wasn't what we were expecting, it also happened for me personally, right? It felt like I'd let the team down, right? We were trying to move in a trajectory. A lot of the people on the team were people I had personally, reached out to, advocated for, right? Advocated for the plan, right? And advocated for exactly, right? Brought them in from, stable jobs at different places, right? And this is ultimately like how it played out, right? I'm very proud of the teams that I build, right? And I've always been very, I pride myself on someone who builds high performing, effective teams in different places. And the Humble Games team was an extremely, extremely solid team, right? The culture and the support that kind of happened afterwards, right? The team supporting themselves, and they all very quickly found, most of them found very quickly places at other, high performing companies as well, and other high performing teams, which no surprise at all that would happen. But yeah, I mean, I manifested appendicitis. Like it was, it was that bad. Like the guilt and the stress and everything else from it. And then I think the other part of it as well is, the members of the team were my first thought. My immediate second thought was the developer relationships in the studios, right? Because again, emotionally for me, like part of this job is ensuring that they're supported, right? And they were now entering into a phase, an era where I didn't know how that was going to happen for them, and I wasn't in control of it, right? And again, these are folks who I had personally said, like, hey, you should sign with us. These are the reasons why, right? And like in any business relationship, like when you suddenly go from being managed by one group of people, and then literally overnight you end up in a situation where it's other people you don't even know who those
Right.
people are,
Out of
right?
your hands.
Exactly, right. And
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot of information I could even share with them, right? I was now on the outside. So yeah, that was for me that was just double layers of guilt, right, towards the team and towards the and towards the development community about like how they were going to be supported or not supported, right? And I just wasn't in control of that.
Yeah. Well, what's remarkable to me, especially, given the fact that you had appendicitis on top of everything else. It feels like, at least from my perspective, that you didn't take a lot of time off, and you kind of jumped right back in within like weeks. It feels like you and Alan Patmore, you founded Good Games Group, which is crazy. Did you even take time to grieve, or did you just decide I'm going to keep momentum going? And just like jump right back in while the
Um,
opening was there.
I mean, I guess it's gonna maybe this. I don't think there was anything to grieve, right? I think
Yeah.
we were in action mode, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
we had founded Good Games Group, because we'd already been talking to investors about potentially what a future for Humble Games could look like,
Yeah.
and with obviously that all now suddenly going in a different direction, we were like, okay, well then what's the pivot, right? Like how do
Yeah.
we keep moving forward? And we were discussing those plans, right? And we thought that would that might be a bit more of an extended thing that we would do, in a few months, right? Maybe the following year. It would take us a little while to get those plans in place. So we thought that maybe that was kind of the break kind of built in, right? And then we had the idea, going back to what we were saying earlier about the um, how are we going to support and help our developers, right? And
Yeah.
how they were now transitioning into something else. So the team was laid off at the end of July. By about September, we had kind of come back with a plan of like, well, look, there's an opportunity for us maybe to help out with the catalog and help out with some of the games, maybe not all of them, maybe as Ziv Davis, the owner of Humble Bundle, who was driving these decisions, would ultimately like wanted to go in a different direction there. But like, okay,
Right.
well, what about if we help you with some of the games? So we had closed that deal back in 2020. This is late 2024 now,
Yeah.
and we announced it in October 2024. So that was kind of the origin story of Good Games Group.
Yeah.
Good Games Group was never intended to be a publishing label or anything like that. It was really just more of a thing that we'd set up to talk about the future of Humble Games. So we'd founded that. We immediately, we got 45 plus clients overnight, right? when we did this deal. Not, if anyone's out there thinking about starting a business, it's not what I would recommend.
Don't do that.
Don't do 45
Don't do
clients
that.
so overnight.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we had a lot of knowledge about what who those developers were and what the games were. So that was kind of the step. The great thing about that is we were able to bootstrap the company. We were cash flow positive day one, right? We'd had all these great things. In terms of an opportunity to found a business, it was. We'd be crazy to turn it down, right? Like I think just our unique knowledge, mine and Alan, Alan was the general manager of Humble Bundle. He had taken over from the founders when they had sold it to IGN Ziff Davis, several years prior. So obviously we had worked together for many years at that point. So we thought this was a great opportunity. It was great for we thought it would also be great for the developers. Like we do genuinely believe that we are the best people to help manage this portfolio, right, and these games and these relationships. So we got that in place, and then at the end of last year, we just announced it a few months ago with the release of Balor Games, was that we were able to then go back and acquire all the rest of the games in the catalog and the entire Humble Games publishing business from Humble Bundle. So So that was our impetus now to launch Balor Games and kind of reintroduce that we are the spiritual successor to what was Humble Games, and then obviously start to release the games that were still unreleased under Humble Games, plus announce our ambitions of like additional games that we were
Wow.
signing and funding as well.
From the outside, that looks to me like a really enormous moment. From the inside, what did that feel like? What did that day feel like, where you're announcing Balor?
Oh, it was fantastic, right? I was able
Imagine.
to. It was great to come home. That's what it felt like, right?
Yeah, yeah,
We had, because we didn't just announce that we had acquired Humble Games. We'd announced that we'd signed some new games with some new
yeah.
partners as part of our completion fund. We had announced that we'd acquired Firestoke Games,
Hmm.
who they there was a collection of developers there who had similar values to the Humble Games community, and we were really great to be giving them a home long term as well. And so it really did feel like we were getting back on track to kind of the ambitions and plans we had set out all the way back in 2020, right? Like we wanted to keep great building, the most diverse and impactful indie games catalog in the business, I'm biased, but I do think we are one of those, right, for sure, and we want to keep growing and keep expanding that and keep growing our development community and pool of great games and keep offering those games to wonderful indie players, right? These are the folks who are the hardcore gamers,
They
right?
really are. Yep.
Yeah, and we want
Yeah.
to keep giving them great innovative experiences, right, and high quality experiences. So it was wonderful to be able to reveal that, um, because I think there'd been quite a bit of ambiguity as to what the future of
Yeah.
of that of Humble Games had been and the catalog and things like that. So I think it was good to give everybody closure and kind of reunite with some of the developers that we were separated from, and for the developers that we've already been working with, we've been doing that kind of behind the scenes. So I think it
Right.
was also good to kind of be able to step out of the shadows and say like, okay, no, this is what we're doing and what we're about.
Speaking of Balor, I know this. You've talked about this a little bit, but would you mind, talking about the name Balor? Where did it come from, and like what does it mean to you?
Oh yeah, we spent years working. No, no. The no.
I
So
love it.
we regard ourselves as a triple I publisher.
Yeah,
If you don't know what triple I is, right? If everyone's watching this, they know what triple I is. We the term indie isn't a term. I feel like it's a term that gets overused a lot, and it
it
can mean a
does.
lot of different things to different people.
Yep.
We've done market research in previously, and we'd ask folks who were core gamers, we'd be like, hey, what does indie mean to you, right? Because we were trying to get an understanding of the term in a true sense, and people would say stuff like, oh, Destiny 2 is an indie game. We were like, interesting. Tell us more. Why is Destiny 2 an
Yeah.
indie game? And what it boiled down to was that there really isn't a definition that is unified in the you ask people in multiple countries around the world, everyone has a different almost to an individual, everyone has a different definition of it. So that's really hard to kind of articulate. If you say, oh, we're the best indie publisher ever, that could mean very different things to very different people. So
Yeah.
we thought it was important to try and define the type of games that we want to publish. And other folks are using these terms as well, but really for us, it's innovative games made by professional teams, right, versus hobbyists or semi-professionals kind of releasing stuff, right, or solo developers, and there's a lot of great games in those categories. Don't get me wrong, I've probably played most of them, right, like, but we definitely wanted to focus on games that offer a social experience, games that players can build communities around. Going all the way back to what I was saying earlier,
Yeah.
games that have communities are games that we think are ultimately successful and worth people's times, right? Like, and we want to provide more experiences. Doesn't necessarily mean it's live service or multiplayer or anything like that. It's just a game that we think that genuinely people would want to talk about and talk to other people about, right? And that can come in many different flavors. So that's what we're focused on, and then with the triple I piece of it, we want to make sure that people understand, like, these are professional, high quality games made by professional teams. You shouldn't be expecting, when you buy a game from Balor, you should expect it being made by developers who genuinely deeply care about their product and published by people that genuinely care deeply about your experiences, right? I often tell the
Mm-hmm.
team internally, we are the advocate, we are the last line of defense
Yeah.
for the player. And we need to always be talking with our development partners about the player experience, right? What are the, we're doing this thing. It may make sense technically. It may cut 2 weeks off the production schedule. It may be the easy thing to do, but does it leave our players in a place where, that they're going to have a good experience or not, right? And again, like
Yeah.
we're,
Yeah.
we're 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 a small team, so it's not like we catch everything, but we do try to go into these conversations genuinely, like talking about the player and what they would expect, and other games they may be playing, right? So if they're playing this game, one of our games, that's not those games are not being made in a bubble, right? They're being created by people
Mm-hmm.
that are immersed in gaming culture in general, immersed in
Yeah.
different games in those genres.
Yep. I find that, triple I framing is really interesting, and it kind of is a perfect, it points exactly to what I want to ask you next. You said at Icon back in April, which was just a few weeks ago, that IP is really more than just a creative content play. It's an infrastructure play. And that the publishers who think in decades will be the ones who define this industry. I really wanted to kind of pull on that thread a little bit and ask you, what does it mean to think in decades as a publisher, and how many publishers are actually doing that?
Oh, great question. So yeah, and I think the context on kind of the talk at Icon, right, was that it was aimed at not just, it wasn't certainly aimed at folks who play games, right? It was aimed at like gaming industry people, and it was aimed also at like non-gaming industry people that might want to invest in gaming. So the language there is very deliberate about how maybe a lifestyle brand would think about gaming, right? I think gaming, as millennials get older, particularly Gen Z, Gen Alpha, right, age up as well, gaming is becoming more and more of a dominant entertainment sector, right? So, and ultimately, other brands outside of entertainment look at entertainment as the vehicle to get their brands in front of people, right? Particularly younger people before they build their buying brand habits, right? So gaming is becoming much more relevant, and has been for a while now, but it's becoming even more relevant than other forms of entertainment. So when we talk about it in terms of like decades and infrastructure, we think and I like to think about things very long term, even if we're not always communicating the specifics of that. 5-6 years ago, we were talking about how everyone was at home playing Animal Crossing and other games, right? But back then we were also talking about how mobile share might move to PC if folks want to negate platform fees. PC is the last bastion of an open platform, outside of Steam. We were talking about how up until very recently, maybe say the last year or so, like how PC hardware was becoming in line with console hardware, right?
Gaming, yep.
I think there might be some challenges all around there now in terms of hardware supplies and stuff like that.
Costs.
So we have to think about these things in that kind of 5 to 10, 15 year time horizon. How social media was, went from being an open global village where everyone kind of hung out in the same town square to now everyone wanting to have curated walled gardens where they only hang out with like-minded people, right? And they're kind of not wanting to have that open discussion with other people now, right? So all of these trends are kind of are playing out. So when we think about the next kind of like 10, 20 years, you have to think about it in terms of gaming is only going to continue to be a more and more relevant vehicle to deliver entertainment and to deliver brands. So when I think about IP as an infrastructure, it's thinking about your audience now that gaming has caught up to other forms of entertainment. There's now much more willingness and openness for IP to kind of cross transmedia, right? So really what we think about it in terms of IP now is there are different, I tend to, to use a very specific analogy, right? Think of it like train stations and train tracks and trains, right? Your IPs are the trains, right? Your players, your viewers, your readers, are passengers on those trains, right? But the stations are the different types of media where people get on and off, right? So if you have a television show about a game, you'll get people that will watch it, and you'll get people who, going back to the word of mouth thing, who will bring their friends, families, others to watch that IP in the media that they're interested in engaging in, but they've never played the game, right? And potentially you can get people to play the game by giving them the right content. And again, this is stuff other publishers have figured out as well. Where it makes sense in a AAA situation is in the indie space. We are predominantly dealing with new IP, right? There is a very strong Darwinism thing happening in the indie space around IP. We're not typically making a 20-25 year franchise, as you might see more in and again, it makes absolute sense for those scales of companies,
Sure.
right, to be thinking about their IP and reinvesting in it. But in the indie space, we're rapidly going through IP, right? So when we think about it in terms of infrastructure, in a bigger, broader sense, right, we're the place where a lifestyle brand can much easily attach with Balor than it could with the individual game. But they're still necessarily connecting with some very, very cool people, in the gaming space who really appreciate IP, right, and really appreciate new IP. So it's different ways of thinking about the infrastructure. And then, as we graduate hits out of our portfolio, that's the opportunity then and it's probably the best time ever in the history of the industry, right, in the gaming industry right now, that there's such a willingness from other verticals to now create other types of transmedia, right? So often indies weren't thought about until they were already massively successful. Now there's much more thought about getting on and getting integrated with IP based initiatives, right, earlier on, which is great for everybody, I think.
What do you think, kind of follow on to that? Like what, from your perspective, what does the indie publishing model need to look like differently in, 2026, say, than it did in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the lessons learned earlier, our view of it. So it was very tempting after we left Humble to be okay. Let's just recreate Humble Games 2.0. We could hire a lot of the same people. We could fund similar projects, right? We would, we lost the marketing vehicle that was the Humble Bundle platform, right? But you can supplement that in other ways, right? And then we took a really big step back on it. We're like, hang on a minute, like we're in a post-COVID bump, we're in a post-AI generation tooling bump, right? Like, obviously in 2024, this was still earlier, but it was happening, right? So we're like, hey, we building the same team again is probably not the right idea here, right? And we took a big step back on it, and we reflected on the lessons of that dynamic I was saying earlier, where hey, the developer may not necessarily be getting the support that they wanted from a big box publisher, right? That's doing all these things together. So we're like, great, maybe there's a different model, and this is what we started focusing on, right? Was how do we do a more bespoke, distributed model? So what we're doing now is we're thinking about each game, each production in its own kind of P&L. We're then staffing specialists because, reflection of where we are as an industry right now, a lot of people are in a consultancy type role. A lot of people are in advisory roles. Everyone's a vendor, right? There's a lot of
a lot of
gaming.
around.
Exactly, gaming, and these things were happening in cycles, right? Like we're in a cycle now where that's very prevalent.
Yes.
A few years from now, that may no longer be true, right? But I do think we as an industry have to face up a little bit that entertainment production has some similarities, right? You rarely see teams on a film or a television production that are like, great, we're going to be together for 20 years, right? Like, the idea of having a Blizzard, right, a studio that would just output hit after hit for 15 years. It does happen, but it's exceptional, right? And even the teams within that, even within each production, they're not permanent members of those studio staff all the time, right? I think on the gaming side, live service and everything else made us think of ourselves as more as a tech companies. And obviously the investors would want us to think of it as tech companies, right? Because of those multiples, again, until very recently. But the reality is the production, the operation side of it is closer to entertainment production, right? So I think we're facing up to that reality to a degree. We're like, look, we can't, we're not going to hire people and say, you're going to have a job forever here, right? We're going to be like, hey, you're coming in, you're working on this production for this particular game. If it goes well, absolutely things go from there, right? It grows and builds on top of that. And obviously we're very confident about the games we have in development, but we're also trying to build a sustainable team as well with that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
all those things aside, that's why we look at this from the perspective of we want to be transparent and honest about where we're taking those bets. But I think what's more positive is for those individual games and projects, we can bring people in who are specialists in what they are doing, right? So if we, a game in our catalog is SCP-5K, it's a horror-based tactical shooter. Great. Well, we can tailor the publishing team around that. To who's executing to then really focus on what are those opportunities. And then we'll have partners who we have across the entire catalog, because that's, again, we're leveraging the catalog, right? If we're going to go pitch PR opportunities to different partners, then we want a partner who has a full array of that. We don't want to pitch individually for each game, right? Or we have people on the team that are coordinating at the entire portfolio level, and that makes sense as well. Like, we're always going to have a portfolio, even if the individual projects scale on that. So we found it, talking to the developers, they also kind of align to that feedback. They like that it's being tailored more to their needs, and then we're again. We put our money where our mouth is. We do back these projects up, right? So the budgets for the projects are higher because we know that we're bringing in more specialized staff for those things as well, across marketing, production, etc.
I mean, and also, kind of moving to the next part of this discussion is that you've been more or less operating as Balor Games for about 3 months now, from at least from the public facing side of things. We are in, kind of the start of the big summer showcase cycle. With Bit Summit was last week or over the weekend, I believe. We got Summer Games Fest coming up, Day of the Devs, all of those things. State of Play, Xbox has their own showcase. I don't want to make you spoil anything, but how are you thinking about, what Balor shows up with? What is in the pipeline? What can you talk about that would be good for our guests? I'm sorry, our listeners to hear about.
Yeah, so I think we've got some exciting stuff coming up. I think we've got some things that one of the games that we haven't shared a release date yet is Wild Blue Skies. Which is our kind of arcade style sci-fi shooter game, made by Chuhai Labs, and Chuhai Labs was founded by Giles Goddard, and Giles was one of the original programmers on the Star Fox series.
Huge Star Fox vibes for sure. Looks so good.
Yeah, exactly. So we're excited to share more about when that game's coming out. We're going to one of the games that we were reunited with when we acquired all the Humble Games assets was a JRPG, turn-based RPG called Threads of Time. Beautiful game, extremely detailed game. We've been working with that team since the acquisition for a little while now. Really kind of getting that ready for release. We're not going to spoil too much, but we'll have a little check in there with folks about that, and we're excited to share more there as well. So, and then we've got bunch of announcements that are coming. Like we have been busy. There are new games that are going to come. I'm not going to reveal any on today, but we do have a bunch of stuff that's coming that we're excited to share more about a little bit later this year as well. So. Yes.
Perfect reason for you to come back and share some more with me when the time is ready, my friend.
Would love to, yeah.
I would love that. I have one last question. It's something that I ask all of my guests. It's my little silly thing at the end of the podcast. So I wanted, the show's called Replay. So I want to ask if you could go back and replay one game, kind of experience it again, fresh for the very first time, which one would it be? And maybe tell me why.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good question as well. I think if I was to, this is also kind of topical as well, probably Subnautica, the original Subnautica game.
Yeah, so good.
One of my favorite games of all time.
Yeah.
The premise of the game has all the things I like, right? Like, you've got a little bit of sci-fi, got a little bit of like mystery box stuff going on.
Yeah.
There's a great plot that slowly unfolds, right? the game does a very good job of show rather than show don't tell, which I also enjoy in a narrative game. I did a fairly good job of wading through early access and played it after it had come out in 1.0.
Yeah.
So I got to experience it kind of the complete
Fresh.
version of it.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think for me that is there's so many on that list because I think there's some games that are fantastic. Like you play through them and you'd love to go back into them blind. But for me that's a standout game. Yeah. And then I like at one point I played it with like a VR mod, so I got to swim around my base and all that sort of stuff in VR, which was a lot of fun until something attacked me.
Yeah. Well, you chose well. I think that's a great game. One of my favorites too. Love it. Okay, so to wrap it up, where can people find Balor Games? And
we're as I mentioned, we're at balorgames.com. So come check us out there. That has all the different games we have on in our library, including the unreleased ones. And then we are growing as a team. So if anyone's watching this and they're looking for a role in the gaming industry, we just launched a jobs page there as well. So we're looking for candidates. So particularly if you work in marketing, we want to hear from you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you really for coming on. I really appreciate your time. It was a great conversation, really great to get to chat with you, and absolutely please come back when you're ready.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. And great questions. So I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And that's Mark Nash, COO and co-founder of Balor Games, founder of the Black Game Developer Fund, and someone who turned one of the worst days in his career into one of the best stories in recent gaming. Links to everything he mentioned are in the show notes. Follow or subscribe to Replay wherever you listen. I'm Greg Off. This is Replay. Thank you for joining.